How are you? Sorry to...
You got the memo.
That's right, orange, right? Although I'm sooner through and through, but it is what it is.
Just a couple of papers.
That's right, that's true too. So blue and orange like that. All right. On behalf of the House Democratic Caucus, I want to thank all the members of the press corps for being here as we conclude the fourth week of the legislative session. Committee deadline week has come to an end, which means one of a few things. It principally means that any legislation that was filed by a member of the House of Representatives and was going to remain alive for the remainder of the session had to come out of committee. That's important. It also means those things that were filed that didn't come out are essentially dead for the year. They could maybe be heard next year, but they're essentially dead for this particular legislative session. That's important for one critical reason, and that is we're now 4 weeks through the legislative session. As a member of the Appropriations and Budget Committee, I have a front row seat to all the revenue-raising measures that the governor and the House Republicans are offering up to try to find a way to close a $900 million budget hole that faces our public schools, faces our senior citizens, faces our hospitals, faces our correctional facilities. And sitting on that front row, one thing has been made abundantly clear to me: they have no plan. For teachers, for state employees, for senior citizens, for our guards in the correctional facilities, for those who care about roads and bridges, 4 weeks have come and gone. We're a quarter of the way through the legislative session, and the Republicans in charge have no plan. The governor, the lieutenant governor, the speaker, and the pro tem have not come to consensus on any significant revenue-raising measures which are crucial to balancing this budget and ensuring that we don't push our kids and senior citizens further behind. That ought to be concerning to every member of the state, every person in the state of Oklahoma. We can clearly see when they put their priorities together, when they're all on the same page, they can act quickly. Because one of the highlights this week was the fact that real ID legislation was passed and was signed by the governor this week. Our caucus is grateful that the Republicans have finally done the right thing, having held it up for year after year after year. But it's a clear sign that when it came to what was really important to the Republicans in charge, such as making sure people could get on an airplane, they got that legislation done out of the House, out of the Senate, and onto the governor's desk in 4 weeks. But when it comes to funding public education, when it comes to funding hospitals in rural Oklahoma, when it comes to funding transportation and infrastructure, they have no plan. If they did, they would have rolled it through, because there's nothing more important in the state of Oklahoma. As important as the real ID legislation is, there's nothing more important than funding our kids and taking care of our seniors and honoring the commitments that we've made to the people in the state of Oklahoma. And so with 4 weeks having come and gone, the voters of the state of Oklahoma should be very concerned about the direction of this legislative session and about the direction of those things, those core services that they desperately care about. Another thing that should cause them great concern is the fact that not only have they not found a way to properly fund state government, but their inaction, their fiscal mismanagement of the state of Oklahoma this week caused our state's bond rating to be downgraded. What that means is for all of our schools, for all of our counties, for all of the state, we're looking at paying more in interest payments because they can't get their fiscal house in order. It is now more expensive to take out debt, or will be more expensive to take out debt to fund core services of government, for one simple reason, for the reason that the Republicans in charge can't find a way to balance this budget that they have created out of their fiscal mismanagement in the state of Oklahoma. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
What about Bill 780, 781?
So as you see, there's a rally today trying to support the people's vote in State Question 780 and 781. Our caucus is cautiously watching legislation moving through the process that would roll back the will of the people. We believe the citizens of the state of Oklahoma were right, and they knew what they were doing when they passed that legislation. It's an insult to the voters of the state of Oklahoma when members of the Republican Party in the House of Representatives claim that the Oklahoma citizens were ignorant when it came to supporting that legislation overwhelmingly as they did. And our caucus will fight to ensure that the will of the majority of the voters in the state of Oklahoma is honored this session.
Scott, the Speaker Pro Tem just said that he doesn't expect teachers to get a raise this year, but that he expects to lay the groundwork for raises. What do you make of that?
Yeah, laying the groundwork. First of all, I appreciate the rare bit of honesty and candor coming from the House Majority Caucus, because just 2 weeks ago, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, we were told by the chairman of Appropriations, as well as the authors of those of the teacher pay raise bill, that they absolutely believe that we could do a $1,000 or a $2,000 pay raise for teachers. My caucus called them on it and said what they're doing is being disingenuous with the educators in this state by promising them false hope. And it didn't take but 2 weeks to go by when they had to demonstrate that we were right, that the teachers of the state of Oklahoma are looking at another year going by, just like the state employees are probably looking at another year going by without a significant pay raise to their already underfunded paychecks. They've got to understand the reason for that, though. It's not because the price of oil is $100 a barrel. It's because the Republican majority have stood by and overseen $1.5 billion worth of tax cuts, $2 billion worth of tax credits and exemptions, the largest gross production tax cut of any major oil and gas producing state in the nation, and they've refused to bring our federal dollars home to take care of health care in the state of Oklahoma. And that's the reason teachers won't get a pay raise. Now, our caucus will, in the next 7 to 10 days, be rolling out revenue-raising measures. We waited to see if the Republican majority would have their own plan. They haven't. They've just talked about a cigarette tax, which is $150 million Band-Aid to cover a $900 million gaping budget hole. It won't solve the problem. Within the next 7 to 10 days, we will take leadership in the state of Oklahoma and offer up our plan to not only properly fund core services, but also to find a way to increase teacher pay as well as state employee pay, because at the end of the day, they desperately need it and deserve it.
Scott, sorry if you've already covered this, but are there any bills that you're happy that didn't pass out of committee?
Certainly. So on the Senate side, our caucus is pleased that it looks like the voucher legislation that would be devastating to an already underfunded public school system has been shelved this year. Diverting more state funding away from our public school children into private schools is never the solution to what ails our public school system, and so we're grateful that that won't see the light of day.
Anything in the House, though? I know there was some legislation, like the Humphreys legislation on abortion. I don't know if that obviously came out of committee. Is there anything that you're pleased didn't get a hearing or failed?
I'd have to go back and look, Dale, I appreciate the question. I'd have to go back and look at what didn't come out of committee. Our concern now is legislation like that essentially, when you got a representative calling women in the state of Oklahoma hosts, that legislation is still alive, and so we have to be we have to be very aware that that could come at us any time in the next 2 weeks. And so we'll when I come and address the press corps here in a couple of weeks after the end of the first deadline week to get bills off of the House floor, I'll have a better idea as to answer that question.
How surprised were you that the Senate passed the reform on A through F? Because many critics said it was institutionalized racism. Today, no discussion, no debate, passed right through.
Yeah, I've in my 11 years here, I try not to get into the minds of the state Senate, regardless of political affiliation. I let them do their thing. But at the end of the day, teachers, parents, administrators need to understand that the A through F grading system, which was mandated by President Barack Obama, essentially, is no longer mandated. It is a failed system that inaccurately brands many of our public schools with a scarlet letter without offering any resources by which to change the educational outcomes for those students who desperately need it. We had an opportunity in the last couple of weeks to gut the A through F grading system, to shelve it, and to replace it with the metrics that truly would help identify those children who need assistance in the public school system in the state of Oklahoma. The Republicans in charge instead opted to do two things. The Republican majority opted to endorse the A through F grading system, and they endorsed institutionalized racism when they decided to overly weight Hispanic and minority students as a way to change the school's grade from an F to a D without actually changing the education received by those students. Any other questions? Thank you all very much. You have a great weekend.